In the first months of 1942, the waters off America's east coast carried a secret the public would not learn for years. German U-boats roamed almost freely, slipping through the darkness of the Atlantic to attack unprotected merchant convoys. Amid this deadly campaign, known to Allied naval intelligence as the Second Happy Time, one encounter stood apart for its eerie final moments. The clash between the U.S. destroyer USS Roper and the German submarine U-85 would become the first confirmed sinking of a U-boat in American coastal waters, and the first to leave behind no survivors, no interrogations, and no answers. The hunt began shortly after midnight on April 14, 1942. The USS Roper, a Clemson-class destroyer assigned to coastal patrol near Cape Hatteras, received a radar contact at just over 2,700 yards. Radar technology was still new for American destroyers, and its detection of a moving surface object immediately set the ship on alert. The crew manned their stations, depth charges were armed. But what they found on the ocean surface defied typical U-boat behavior. Instead of diving, U-85 remained on the surface, moving erratically, almost as if attempting to flee in the open, an inexplicable tactic for a submarine designed to vanish beneath the waves at the first hint of danger. Lieutenant Commander Hamilton Howe, Roper's captain, later wrote in his action report that the German sub appeared to disregard the threat of gunfire, instead trying to race eastward. Naval historians still question why Captain Lieutenant Gunther Gretschel made this decision. Was the U-boat suffering mechanical failure? Were the batteries depleted? Or was the crew attempting to abandon ship in the dark, hoping to surrender before the inevitable attack? Whatever the reason, Howe issued the order, "Open fire." A torrent of 3-inch shells and .50 caliber machine gun rounds cut across the waves, striking the conning tower and the forward casing. Within minutes, U-85 was immobilized. Survivors should have appeared in the water. Yet none surfaced. Not a single German sailor emerged from the listing wreck, nor were there signs of an attempted escape. The sea remained black, quiet, too quiet. Howe faced a brutal decision. With no visible survivors and the possibility that the U-boat was preparing to scuttle itself or deploy torpedoes, he ordered depth charges dropped along the submarine's last known bearing. 11 detonations tore through the water column. Roper's deck vibrated with each blast. When the turbulence finally settled, U-85 slipped beneath the surface for the last time. The struggle on both vessels was never fully known. German logbooks from the submarine's final patrol, often the best insight into dying U-boats, were lost with the crew. American investigators could only reconstruct fragments, intercepted wireless signals, scattered homeland communications, and the damaged remains of the vessel later raised by U.S. Navy divers. One diver noted in his post-operation summary that the submarine's forward torpedo tubes were loaded but unfired, contradicting the initial fear that the U-boat had been preparing to attack. The mystery deepened. Why had the German crew hesitated to dive or defend themselves? Context from the broader U-boat campaign offers some clues. By April 1942, Admiral Donitz had pushed his submarines aggressively into U.S. waters, exploiting the inexperience of the newly mobilized American coastal defenses. Many U-boat captains operated with limited intelligence, inconsistent radio contact, and mechanical issues from long patrols. U-85 had already suffered damage during earlier missions. Gretschel may have believed he was being shadowed by aircraft, misread sonar pings, or attempted a bold surface escape under the assumption that American destroyers lacked effective radar. The fog of war, compounded by night, fatigue, and pressure, could have led to split-second decisions with fatal consequences. Yet divers would later find another peculiar detail: personal items hurriedly gathered near the submarine's control room, as if the crew expected to surface and evacuate. The pattern suggested confusion, perhaps even panic. Without survivors, no one could confirm whether Gretschel attempted to surrender. Some historians propose that the U-boat's inability to dive stemmed from a critical mechanical failure. Others suggest that the crew feared depth charge attack even more than surface gunfire. The wreck itself, now an official war grave, provides limited clues. Its hull bears evidence of both shell impacts and catastrophic internal flooding. For modern naval analysts, the encounter remains a lesson in the unpredictable nature of maritime warfare. Technology, training, and strategy matter, but so do the intangible pressures of the battlefield: confusion, fear, and rapid shifts in perception. The suddenness of the clash, the absence of survivors, and the subdued state of the submarine during its final minutes leave behind a haunting narrative of two crews fighting in darkness, each unsure of the other's intentions. As dawn broke on April 14th, the USS Roper recovered what little it could, scattered debris, a few personal effects, and the unsettling realization that no enemy sailor had escaped the wreck. The destroyer sailed on, leaving behind a patch of quiet ocean where a German crew had met its end without a witness to tell their story. And yet, U-85 was only the first of many submarines whose final moments would mystify Allied commanders. As the war expanded, from the Atlantic to the Mediterranean and deep into the Pacific, other vessels would vanish without distress calls, without wreckage, and without a single survivor. The next story begins not in American waters, but in the shadowed, mine-laden expanse of the Mediterranean Sea. The Mediterranean in 1941 was one of the most lethal bodies of water on Earth. Beneath its deceptively blue surface lay a hidden network of naval traps, thick minefields, prowling Italian MAS boats, and the constant patrols of Axis aircraft. It was in this contested sea that HMS Olympus, an aging but dependable British submarine, began what would become one of Malta's most mysterious naval losses of the war. Few outside the island garrison knew the dangers Olympus faced. Fewer still understood the strange circumstances that would surround her disappearance. In early June 1941, Malta was tightening under siege. Axis bombers struck the island day and night, reducing harbors to rubble and forcing British forces into increasingly desperate operations. Submarines based at Valletta's Menol Island became the island's lifeline, slipping through minefields to bring fuel, ammunition, and medical supplies from Alexandria and Gibraltar. HMS Olympus, commanded by Lieutenant Commander Herbert Lakin, was one of these vital vessels. On June 8, under strict orders of radio silence, she was tasked with ferrying evacuated submarine crews off the battered island, taking them to the relative safety of Alexandria. 60-plus men crowded aboard a ship designed to hold far fewer. Before departure, crew members noted a growing tension. Olympus had already endured several near misses from air raids. Damage assessments hinted at stress fractures along the hull, metal that had been pushed to its limits by months of relentless diving. Yet the urgency of the evacuation meant there was no alternative. Malta Command had issued its orders. Olympus was needed, battered hull or not. Her mission: slip out in the pre-dawn darkness, bypass known Italian mine belts, and reach open water before the Axis reconnaissance aircraft resumed their relentless sweeps. Shortly after 0430 hours, Olympus departed the Grand Harbor. Survivors later recalled the eerie silence. No farewell signals were exchanged, no lights were permitted, not even the faint glow of a deck lantern. The island's cliffs faded behind them as the submarine crept forward at low speed, hugging the coastline. Lakin followed a charted safe lane, but those lanes changed constantly. Italian mine layers had been active for weeks, and Malta's harbor defenses struggled to keep their maps updated amid the chaos of bombardment. Just after clearing the entrance to Marsamxett Harbor, disaster struck. A deafening blast tore through the hull, sudden, violent, and unmistakable. The submarine heaved upward, then plunged downward almost immediately. The explosion had likely detonated near the forward section, ripping open ballast tanks and collapsing watertight compartments. Men asleep in lower decks never had a chance. The sea flooded in seconds. Those who survived the initial shocks scrambled onto the dark surface of the water. The entire event had unfolded so quickly that Olympus barely had time to settle. A handful of men clung to floating debris, shouting to one another in the darkness. One lieutenant later described it as a void with voices dissolving one by one. Only a dozen men would survive the cold swim back to Malta's coastline. Over 80 others, officers, sailors, and evacuated submarine crews, were lost beneath the waves. Yet it was where the explosion occurred that raised questions among Malta Command. The crew insisted that the submarine had struck a mine farther inside the supposed safe corridor than charts suggested. This contradicted known Italian minefield boundaries, implying one of two unsettling possibilities. Either the minefield had drifted due to currents and poor anchoring, or, and this was whispered quietly in officers' circles, Italian forces had successfully laid mines closer to Malta's harbors without detection. The idea that the Axis had infiltrated so close to the island's defensive perimeter was alarming. British intelligence soon reviewed captured Axis logs and reports, but nothing conclusively confirmed the placement of a new field. The loss of Olympus fit no clear pattern. Historians later noted that Italian mine-laying operations around Malta were frequent but imprecise. A single rogue string of mines could have been carried miles from its intended location. Still, the testimonies of survivors seemed firm. They believed the submarine struck an explosive long before it should have. The implications haunted Malta Command. It meant that every future submarine departing the harbor faced a potentially unknown hazard, hidden by incomplete charts and the constant shifting of wartime chaos. For the men on Olympus, the struggle had ended the moment the mine detonated. For the officers left behind, the mystery was only beginning. Today, divers exploring the wreck have confirmed a massive breach near the bow, consistent with a single high-explosive naval mine. But the exact location of the detonation still fuels debate. Was Olympus led astray by lightless, blacked-out navigation? Did drifting mines wander into the exit lane undetected? Or did the Axis manage to sow mines far closer to Valletta than the British ever realized? As the Mediterranean War intensified in late 1941, the loss of HMS Olympus became a grim symbol of the dangers faced by the submariners of Malta. And while her fate was tragic, she was not alone. Other submarines across the globe would vanish with even fewer clues, none more haunting than the American submarine that disappeared in the narrow waters off Japan's northern coast, the USS Wahoo. By 1943, the narrow waters of the La Perouse Strait, separating Hokkaido from the Russian island of Sakhalin, had become one of the most treacherous passages in the Pacific. Strong currents, dense fog, and relentless Japanese patrols made the strait a deadly gauntlet for any submarine attempting to break through. Yet that autumn, the U.S. Navy submarine USS Wahoo, under the legendary command of Lieutenant Commander Dudley "Mush" Morton, was ordered to navigate those waters in search of Japanese shipping. What happened next would become one of the most disturbing and debated disappearances of the Pacific War, an operation ending in total silence, total loss, and no survivors. The Wahoo was already a celebrated boat. Her aggressive patrols in 1942 and early 1943 had earned Morton a reputation as one of the most daring submarine commanders in the Pacific Fleet. His philosophy, take her down fast and hit them hard, had resulted in multiple sinkings and commendations. But fame brought scrutiny. Some officers criticized Morton's boldness, calling it reckless. Others saw him as the ideal submariner for a war that required speed, decisiveness, and relentless pressure on Japanese supply lines. On September 9, 1943, Wahoo departed Midway Atoll for her 7th patrol. Intelligence briefing notes indicated heightened Japanese convoy activity around northern Japan, making the La Perouse Strait an attractive ambush point. Morton's orders were clear: aggressive reconnaissance, intercept and destroy hostile shipping, maintain radio silence. Radio silence was standard doctrine in contested waters, but in Wahoo's case, it meant that once she submerged for patrol, no news, good or bad, would return to base until Morton chose to break silence. He never did. Once inside the strait, Wahoo encountered fierce resistance. Japanese anti-submarine warfare (ASW) reports later translated by U.S. Naval Intelligence revealed a coordinated effort to trap a submarine believed to be operating in the area. Between October 9th and 11th, Japanese Army aircraft stationed near WWII reported sighting a periscope wake and launching depth charges. Shore batteries at Cape Soya claimed to have fired on a surfaced or semi-submerged submarine. The timing correlated almost precisely with Wahoo's expected presence in the strait. The struggle for Morton's crew remains largely unknown. Submariners had little room for error. One wrong dive angle or malfunctioning valve could be fatal. The Wahoo had already experienced mechanical trouble on previous patrols, including battery issues. If Morton was attempting to evade aircraft and shore fire simultaneously, his options would have narrowed rapidly. To the east lay mined waters and heavy coastal surveillance. To the west, powerful tides pushed the submarine toward shallow zones. The strait, at its narrowest, was a choke point both physically and tactically. A note discovered after the war, written by a junior Japanese ASW officer, offered a chilling line: the submarine persisted but could not dive deeply. That phrase has puzzled historians for decades. Did the Wahoo's ballast tanks fail? Was the hull compromised? Or did the submarine strike an underwater obstacle or mine before it could fully submerge? The officer's wording, persisted, suggests that Wahoo fought to escape. But the conclusion of Japanese reports was stark. A large oil slick and debris were spotted late on October 11th. No bodies were observed. The sea carried away everything else. To understand what might have happened, naval analysts looked to the historical context of 1943. Japanese defenses in the strait were tightening. The Imperial Japanese Navy had laid extensive mine belts along the northern approaches to Hokkaido. Aircraft from WWII regularly patrolled the area. Shore batteries were on constant alert for Soviet activity as well as American submarines. In such an environment, even a skilled commander like Morton faced overwhelming odds. And yet questions linger. The debris identified by Japanese patrols was never definitively matched to Wahoo. Some analysts argue that multiple submarines, American, Soviet, or even Japanese, could have been active in the region. Others point to the strange fact that Wahoo sent no distress signal whatsoever. Even under attack, many submarines managed a brief transmission. Wahoo remained completely silent. Was her radio disabled, or did she fall victim so suddenly that the crew had no chance? Modern expeditions shed new light. In 2006, a dive team working with U.S. Navy historians located what they believed to be the Wahoo's wreck in the strait, resting at roughly 213 feet. The hull bore signs of an internal explosion, possibly from a direct depth charge hit. Yet even this discovery raised additional questions. The pattern of hull damage suggested multiple strikes, but the position of the wreck implied that Wahoo may have surfaced, attempted an emergency maneuver, and then been pushed downward by a final catastrophic blast. No remains were found. The loss of the Wahoo resonates through submarine history not just because of Morton's fame but because of the sheer mystery of her final hours. The strait kept its secrets well. No survivor accounts. No final log entries. No emergency beacon. Only scattered Japanese reports and a silent wreck on the seafloor. Today, naval officers studying Wahoo's last patrol draw several lessons. The peril of overconfidence, the limits of aggressive tactics, and the harsh truth that in submarine warfare, even the most skilled commanders are vulnerable to a single mistake or a single well-placed enemy strike. The Wahoo's disappearance stands as a somber reminder of how quickly a veteran crew could vanish without a trace. Yet the Pacific's dark ledger of submarine losses did not end with Wahoo. Thousands of miles away in the vast Indian Ocean, another British vessel would vanish with no clear cause, leaving behind an even deeper mystery, the fate of HMS Stonehenge. The Indian Ocean in 1944 was a vast expanse of shifting currents, monsoon winds, and deadly uncertainties. For the submariners of the Royal Navy's Eastern Fleet, it was also a battlefield largely hidden from the public eye. Unlike the Atlantic or the Mediterranean, the Indian Ocean received little press coverage. Yet its dangers were every bit as real and in some ways more mysterious. It was here, in these deep tropical waters, that the British T-class submarine HMS Stonehenge vanished without sending a single distress call. Her loss became one of the war's most unsettling submarine disappearances, an event marked by silence, confusion, and unanswered questions that lingered for decades. In March 1944, HMS Stonehenge departed the port of Trincomalee in Ceylon, modern-day Sri Lanka. Classified documents describe her mission as a routine patrol toward the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, strategic territories controlled by Japan since early 1942. These islands served as listening posts, supply depots, and forward air bases for Japanese forces pushing into the Bay of Bengal. British submarines frequently patrolled the surrounding waters, targeting supply ships and gathering intelligence. Stonehenge, under the command of Lieutenant Commander Hugh Mackenzie, had completed several successful operations. Confidence in the crew was high, but something was different about this patrol. Stonehenge had undergone repairs shortly before her departure. Minor but persistent mechanical issues, particularly involving her engines and diving systems, had been noted in engineering logs. Several officers at Trincomalee later remarked that while the submarine was considered seaworthy, there were concerns that the repairs had been rushed. Yet the pressure to maintain Allied presence in the region outweighed hesitation. Stonehenge was ordered out on March 15, and she slipped beneath the horizon by nightfall. Her first days at sea should have been uneventful. Patrol routes were pre-charted, communication protocols established, and enemy activity, while present, was predictable. But Stonehenge did not make her scheduled position reports. By March 25, 10 days after departure, British command was growing uneasy. By the 29th, the Eastern Fleet officially listed Stonehenge as overdue, presumed missing. No sighting. No signal. No survivors. The struggle to understand her disappearance began immediately. British naval intelligence reviewed Japanese records, hoping to identify any ASW operations in the region matching Stonehenge's patrol dates. There were clues but nothing definitive. A Japanese aircraft based at Car Nicobar reported attacking a surface submarine on March 17. The pilot claimed a hit near the conning tower before the target submerged. Yet the location of the sighting did not align perfectly with Stonehenge's assigned route, raising doubts among analysts. Another report, this one from a Japanese destroyer, described a depth charge attack in the Bay of Bengal around the same period. The destroyer's captain wrote that large air bubbles and oil rose to the surface afterward. Once again, the position was plausible but not certain. The fog of war clouded everything. Enemy reports were often exaggerated or inaccurately logged. Lines of latitude or longitude could be miswritten. And Stonehenge was not the only Allied submarine operating in the region. To add context, it is essential to understand the broader situation in 1944. The Bay of Bengal was increasingly contested. Japan, fearing an Allied invasion of Burma or Malaya, had reinforced its air patrols and expanded its minefields. British submarines in turn increased their patrol frequency. It was a chaotic environment, where submariners often operated with incomplete intelligence and faced hazards that even experienced crews struggled to predict. But there was another unsettling possibility, one recorded quietly in the Eastern Fleet's internal correspondence. Stonehenge may never have been attacked. Instead, she may have succumbed to an accident. Several T-class submarines suffered catastrophic failures during the war. Faulty valves, diving system malfunctions, and issues involving torpedo handling. A single mechanical fault during a dive, especially near shallow ridges or uncharted hazards, could have caused Stonehenge to plunge beyond crush depth in seconds. One officer who reviewed the engineering reports noted a troubling pattern. Stonehenge's recurring defects suggest systemic strain. A failure under load cannot be ruled out. His comment, buried among hundreds of wartime memos, would not resurface until historians examined the case years later. The reveal came decades after the war ended. In 2011, an expedition led by amateur divers and supported by the Royal Navy identified a submarine wreck off the coast of Sumatra. Subsequent analysis confirmed it was almost certainly HMS Stonehenge. The wreck sat on the seafloor at a depth that suggested a catastrophic descent. Its hull bore no obvious signs of depth charge attack. No blast patterns consistent with aerial bombs. Instead, the damage appeared internal, possibly the result of a mechanical failure or collision with the seabed during an emergency dive. Yet even this discovery left unanswered questions. Why was Stonehenge so far off her assigned route? Had currents pushed her? Did the crew attempt to evade an aircraft? Did they dive to escape a perceived threat and never resurface? In the end, the wreck offered clues but not certainty. All 86 men aboard were lost. Their final moments remain hidden behind layers of rust, sand, and time. As the British Admiralty closed the file on HMS Stonehenge, they noted that her loss, tragic as it was, fit the brutal reality of submarine warfare in the 1940s. Most disappearances left no witnesses, no records, and no chance for survival. And as the war raged on into 1944, the U.S. Navy faced similar tragedies, none more haunting than the disappearance of the USS Golet amid the vast, unforgiving waters near Japan's northern coast. By mid-1944, the tide of the Pacific War had shifted in favor of the Allies, yet the waters surrounding Japan remained some of the most dangerous on Earth. It was in these unforgiving seas, cold, storm-lashed, and patrolled relentlessly by Japanese anti-submarine forces, that the USS Golet, a Gato-class submarine of the U.S. Navy, vanished without a trace. Her disappearance remains one of the Pacific Fleet's most disturbing submarine losses, not only because no survivors were ever found, but because her final hours were reconstructed only through the fragmented reports of her enemies. USS Golet departed Midway on May 28, 1944, for her second war patrol. Commanding her was Lieutenant Commander James S. Clark, a capable officer with a steady reputation. Golet's patrol area lay off northern Honshu, waters that had become increasingly hostile. Japan, anticipating American carrier raids and submarine intrusions, strengthened its coastal defenses with new patrol craft, expanded minefields, and aircraft specifically trained to detect periscope wakes. Clark knew he was heading into a region where multiple U.S. subs had already been lost. His orders were simple, stark, and dangerous. Locate and disrupt enemy shipping routes. Report contacts when possible. Maintain offensive pressure. The struggle began almost immediately. Weather reports from the time indicate rough seas and heavy fog along Honshu's eastern coastline. Submarines relied on both visual sightings and radar to track targets, but high waves and dense mist severely limited their effectiveness. Complicating matters further, Japanese radio intercepts picked up by Allied intelligence, and only analyzed after the fact, suggested that a submarine was being actively hunted in Golet's general operating zone as early as June 4. Whether that submarine was Golet is almost certain, but cannot be definitively proven. Golet never sent a single contact report. Not a single transmission. Silence stretched on for weeks. The first insight into what befell her came not from American sources, but from a translated Japanese operational log. On June 14, 1944, two Japanese anti-submarine vessels, the coast defense ships CD-4 and CD-7, were patrolling off Aomori Prefecture when sonar contact was established on a submerged target. Their reports are chilling in detail. The target maneuvered evasively, suggesting an actively controlled submarine rather than debris or a wreck. The Japanese ships launched a relentless depth charge barrage, documented as at least 2 full attack runs, each with approximately 15 charges. The sea boiled with explosions. For nearly an hour, the Japanese vessels circled, listening between detonations for signs of life. After the second attack run, their logs noted a column of oil rising to the surface, accompanied by debris described as wooden fragments and material consistent with a foreign submarine. The officers concluded the submarine had been destroyed. They recorded no attempt to rescue survivors, or any indication that survivors existed. These reports, translated after the war, aligned almost perfectly with the window during which Golit should have been operating in the region. The U.S. Navy officially presumed her lost on July 26, 1944, after she failed to return to base. All 82 men aboard were declared missing. Yet there were troubling details. Japanese accounts noted that the submarine they attacked appeared to maneuver sluggishly, as if struggling to dive or change depth. This has led historians to question whether Golit was already damaged, perhaps from earlier ASW aircraft, or an accidental brush with a mine. Gato-class submarines were robust but not invulnerable. A single cracked valve, a jammed plane, or flooding in an engine room could severely limit their ability to evade attack. If Golit entered the June 14 battle already wounded, her crew may have been fighting a hopeless struggle from the very beginning. Another layer of mystery involves the debris itself. While Japanese logs described the wreckage as consistent with a foreign submarine, American analysts found the descriptions vague. The amount of oil reported was significant but not definitive. Wartime exaggerations were common. No recovered material was ever brought into Allied hands. The absence of a distress signal, standard practice even under attack, remains one of the most puzzling aspects. Some speculate that Golit's radio mast had been damaged. Others believe the crew may have attempted an emergency dive so rapidly that communications equipment was rendered unusable. Then there is the chilling discovery made long after the war. In the early 1970s, fishermen off northern Honshu dredged up what some believe to be part of a submarine's internal structure: twisted metal, sheared clean in some places, buckled in others. The fragments were lost before proper analysis could be conducted, leaving only unverified eyewitness testimony to fuel speculation. Even modern surveys have yet to locate Golit's exact resting place. Somewhere beneath hundreds of meters of cold water, the submarine lies undisturbed, its hull sealed, its final battle locked silently within. For naval historians, Golit's disappearance offers a haunting insight into the lethal nature of submarine warfare. The Pacific in 1944 was a deadly chessboard where detection meant destruction, and where a single misjudgment or a single fortunate enemy strike could annihilate an entire crew without warning. Golit's final patrol remains a stark reminder of the unseen dangers beneath the waves. But her story is not the last. As the war drew to a close in 1945, even with Japan on the brink of defeat, the oceans claimed yet another submarine, one whose loss would mark the final U.S. submarine casualty of World War II, the USS Bullhead. By the summer of 1945, the Second World War was drawing to its violent close, yet the Pacific remained a battlefield where death could come without warning. Even as Japanese cities burned under relentless air raids and Allied forces closed in on the home islands, isolated outposts continued to fight with the same ferocity they had shown since 1941. In this tense, unpredictable final phase of the war, one last American submarine would vanish, lost just days before Japan's surrender. The USS Bullhead, a Belau-class submarine, became the final U.S. submarine sunk in World War II, and her disappearance stands today as a sobering reminder that even in the war's final moments, the ocean could still swallow a vessel whole without leaving a single survivor. USS Bullhead began her third war patrol on July 31, 1945, departing Fremantle, Australia. Her mission seemed straightforward compared to earlier campaigns: patrol the waters of the Java Sea and the eastern approaches to the Lombok Strait, regions still monitored by scattered Japanese aircraft and small warships. At this late stage in the war, most Japanese naval assets had been destroyed or isolated. But one threat remained potent: land-based aircraft. Japan's Army air units, dispersed throughout the Dutch East Indies, continued flying anti-submarine patrols despite fuel shortages and the crumbling command structure. This made Bullhead's assigned patrol zone deceptively dangerous. On August 6, the same day the atomic bomb fell on Hiroshima, Bullhead reported passing through the Dampier Strait. It would be her final confirmed transmission. After that, silence. Her orders had been to move northward toward Bali, coordinate with two other submarines, USS Capitaine and USS Puffer, and begin reconnaissance of Japanese coastal traffic. But when Capitaine attempted to contact Bullhead on August 11th, there was no reply. The ocean returned only static. Insight into what may have happened comes from Japanese records examined after the war. On August 6th, a flight of Japanese Army Ki-51 Sonya dive bombers took off from Denpasar airfield on Bali. Their mission log recorded a submarine sighting near the entrance to the Lombok Strait. According to the Japanese report, the aircraft surprised the submarine on the surface. The pilot claimed a direct hit with 260-kilogram bombs. A plume of water erupted, then a spreading oil slick. No men were seen in the water. The aircraft circled twice more before returning to base, convinced the submarine had been destroyed. The location, timing, and description match Bullhead's expected route almost exactly. The struggle aboard Bullhead in her final moments can only be imagined, but naval doctrine provides clues. Submarines traveling through narrow straits often surfaced at night to recharge batteries. If Bullhead was caught on the surface during daylight, perhaps delayed by currents or weather, she would have been extraordinarily vulnerable. Palau-class submarines were strong underwater but exposed when surfaced. A single well-placed bomb could easily rupture the pressure hull or ignite the vessel's fuel stores. With no distress signal received, analysts believe the attack was sudden, swift, and fatal. Context adds further weight to this conclusion. Japanese aircraft in the region, though increasingly limited by fuel shortages, remained skilled at detecting submarine wakes in shallow tropical waters. The straits around Bali funneled submarine traffic into predictable paths the Japanese had patrolled for years. Bullhead may have unknowingly crossed directly beneath a patrol route used since early in the war. Yet the reveal deepens the mystery. Bullhead was expected to meet Capitaine just days after the suspected attack. Capitaine later reported hearing heavy depth charging in the area, though she believed it was directed at Japanese submarines. She also encountered multiple oil slicks during her patrol, but none could be definitively linked to Bullhead. No wreckage was ever found. No body was recovered. The sea gave nothing back. The absence of survivors is tragically consistent with submarine losses during the war. A direct bomb strike on a surfaced submarine often left the crew no time to abandon ship. Watertight compartments could seal men inside within seconds. The hull, breached and flooding, would sink rapidly, and in shallow straits, currents could drag the wreck for miles. Without exact coordinates, a search becomes nearly impossible. For modern naval historians, Bullhead's disappearance offers a stark lesson about the unpredictability of war's final days. Even as Japan neared collapse, isolated units retained their capacity to inflict devastating losses. The ocean was no less lethal simply because the war was ending. Bullhead's crew, 84 officers and men, died unaware that within 9 days, Emperor Hirohito would announce Japan's surrender. In the years since, multiple efforts have attempted to locate Bullhead's wreck. Yet despite advanced sonar and diving technology, her exact resting place remains unknown. Somewhere in the warm, shifting waters of the Lombok Strait lies the final American submarine lost in World War II, her steel hull entombing a hero's chapter that ended without witnesses. Bullhead's silent fate closes the list of 5 disturbing submarine hunts with no survivors, vessels destroyed in darkness, secrecy, and uncertainty. Together, their stories form a chilling reminder of the invisible war fought beneath the waves, where entire crews could vanish without a trace, leaving only scattered enemy reports, whispered theories, and the eternal silence of the deep.